Hello, I'm John McBride. Thank you for joining me for a cruise to the Goto Islands. We will discuss the history of the hidden Christians of the Goto Islands. Christianity was brought to Japan by the Portuguese Jesuits in 1549. For nearly a century, Christianity experienced a golden era in Japan, with many feudal lords converting to Christianity. However, for reasons we will examine, a ban on Christianity was enforced in 1614. Following Japan's national seclusion policy of 1641, the last foreign missionary was martyred in Japan in 1644. Christians went into hiding and would continue their faith secretly for almost 250 years. Small statues such as this one were used as covert devotional aids by the hidden Christians of Goto. Outwardly, they resemble the Buddhist divinity of compassion, Kannon, but they were venerated as the Virgin Mary, and often incorporated hidden or disguised crucifixes. I do have a document that you can download at bit.ly/Goto Christians. In 1797, an agreement between the Omura and Goto clans saw 3,000 Omura hidden Christians forcibly immigrated to the remote Goto Islands as farm labor. Japan opened to international trade in 1854, and a Catholic church was built in Nagasaki, but this was for the exclusive use of international residents. Hidden Christians in Urakami, a suburb of Nagasaki, revealed themselves to the priest of Oura Church, and this news led to the Christians on Goto also revealing themselves. However, the late period Edo shogunate was not yet ready to allow Christianity, and the self-revealed Christians were persecuted and many died. It was not for another 19 years, in 1873, under intense international condemnation, that the new Japanese Meiji government passed laws of freedom of religion. The Goto Christians built churches on the locations of the prisons in which they had been tortured as commemorations of those who had perished under the torture. Our story begins in 1494, when Spain and Portugal divided up the world under the Treaty of Tordesillas, and Japan fell into the sphere of influence of Portugal. 16 years later, Portugal forcibly took the port of Goa and established a fortified presence which would act as a base in India and for further commercial and naval activities through East Asia. Goa was controlled by the Portuguese until 1961 as Europe's last possession in India. The streetscape of Goa today retains this European history. From the new Goa base, it was just 3 years before the Portuguese arrived in China, initially the small island in the Pearl River Delta, and then almost 44 years later at the better-known Macau Island. Macau's renowned landmark is the ruins of St. Paul's Church. The facade survived after the church was destroyed by a typhoon and fire in 1835. The facade was intricately carved between 1620 and 1627 by Japanese Christian stonemasons who had been exiled from Japan. The Jesuits were known for accommodating local culture in their proselytizing. In the facade of St. Paul's, we see the Virgin Mary stepping on a 7-headed hydra. The Chinese characters state, "Holy Mother tramples the heads of the dragon." The Portuguese were content trading between the Philippines and China, and it is not for another 22 years before 3 Portuguese merchants were blown off course on a Chinese junk and landed at Tanegashima in 1543, the first Europeans to arrive in Japan. This was during the Azuchi Momoyama period, when two great unifier generals ruled Japan. The first general was Oda Nobunaga. The three Portuguese merchants sold 2 muskets to the local Tanegashima feudal lord, who immediately put a master swordsmith to work copying the muskets. The Japanese master craftsman was able to improve several features of the muskets, but struggled with the screw technology of the barrel. He ended up bartering his daughter to the Portuguese in exchange for the technology. His poor daughter's sacrifice is memorialized, and she is remembered as Princess Wakasa. The muskets were called Tanegashima. Within 10 years of introduction, over 300,000 Tanegashima muskets were manufactured. 32 years later, in 1575, the muskets were used in a turning point in Japanese history by Oda Nobunaga, this began the process of ending the warring states period and the unification of Japan. Christianity arrived in Japan in 1549 when Francis Xavier, one of 2 founders of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, arrived in Kagoshima. From Kagoshima, Xavier traveled up to Hirado, where he received a warm welcome from the Matsuura clan, top left there. Matsuura's conversion to Christianity caused his subjects to convert en masse, and Hirado became a hub of Christianity. From there, Xavier traveled by sea to Hakata, and then on to Yamaguchi, the Kyoto of the West, where he was again warmly welcomed. Xavier was determined, though, to meet the emperor, and so he continued on to Kyoto. Kyoto was in ruins, though, and he was refused an audience, and he quickly moved on to the merchant port of Sakai in Osaka, where he met wealthy Sakai merchants. One of them was the great tea master, Sen no Rikyu. He refined the tea ceremony performed to this day. Sen no Rikyu was born in Sakai and was 28 years of age when Xavier visited. At the time, he was studying tea ceremony under Take no Jo and Zen Buddhism at Daitokuji, Kyoto Zen Temple. Rikyu would later become Oda Nobunaga's tea master from 1579, and 29 years later, he would become Hideyoshi's great tea master. Now, of course, tea ceremony is linked to Zen Buddhism, and it may be a stretch to associate some of the movements in the tea ceremony to the Catholic Mass. But I think Rikyu would have witnessed the Mass, and whenever I observe tea ceremony, I do think of the use of the corporal and the pall, 2 purifying cloths used in Mass, just as the fukusa is used in Japanese tea ceremony. Xavier then traveled back to Yamaguchi, where he had been warmly welcomed, and he celebrated Japan's first Christmas there in 1552. And so Yamaguchi prides itself as the birthplace of Japanese Christmas, and this fir tree on the right is a monument dedicated to Japan's first Christmas. The greatest man of the Jesuit missions in the East after Xavier was Alessandro Valignano. Valignano met with Oda Nobunaga. He met him in 1569, and he presented Nobunaga with a large mirror and received permission to conduct missionary work in Kyoto. Valignano brought an African slave with him in 1579 and later presented the slave to Nobunaga, who gave him the samurai name Yasuke. He gave the slave the name Yasuke. Yasuke became a bodyguard to Nobunaga and was with him when Nobunaga died. Yasuke was afforded the status of samurai, the first non-Japanese to receive this status. Kano Naizen's screen, Arrival of the Southern Barbarians from 1600, shows a European ship arriving at a Japanese port. A group of kapitans alight from the ship, accompanied by an African slave holding an umbrella, much like Yasuke accompanied Valignano as his valet. They are welcomed by Jesuit missionaries, Franciscan monks, and Japanese Christian converts. Children delight in the unusual Franciscan monks. Traded goods, including silks from China and rare animals, are unloaded. I think that's a civet cat in the cage there. The Karamono, literally Chinese goods store, sells traded goods such as silk fabrics and ceramics from China, and tiger and leopard pelts. At the back of the Karamono shop is Nambanji Temple, which was located in Kyoto, where a Christian mass is being held in front of the altar with a statue of the Messiah. This is an amazing image. When Valignano first met with the great unifier of Japan, Oda Nobunaga, Nobunaga was at the height of his powers. His castle was the first great castle keep of Japan, built at Azuchi alongside Lake Biwa, removed from the danger of fires in Kyoto and overlooking great water and land-based transportation routes. Nobunaga permitted Valignano to build a seminary in the grounds of the castle in 1580, just incredible, and a church in Kyoto, which was likely a converted temple structure. Valignano advised 3 Christian daimyo to send an embassy of 4 young men to Rome in 1582. And they would meet Pope Gregory XIII in 1585. The 3 Christian daimyo, or feudal lords, who sent the embassy of 4 young men were Omura Sumitada from Nagasaki, Arima Harunobu from Amakusa, and Otomo Sorin from Oita. They were central figures among many other Christian daimyo. This was truly the golden age for Christianity in Japan. Christianity had initially flourished on Hirado after daimyo Matsura converted. However, his later retainers rejected Christianity and the Jesuits moved their trading port to Yokoseura in the Omura domain, another Christian daimyo domain. But that daimyo had many enemies, and after Yokoseura was razed, so Omura had many enemies and Yokoseura was razed. So the Jesuits moved to a small fishing village called Nagasaki. And hundreds of Japanese merchants and laborers followed them. And in fact, Nagasaki was ceded to the Jesuits in 1571 as a way of protecting the port. This was done by the great Christian daimyo Omura Sumitada, who was baptized as Dom Bartholomew in 1563. He retired to the other far side of Omura Bay, but it was he who had opened Nagasaki to foreign trade, and its flourishing was thanks to him. Now, Nagasaki flourished, and it was known as the Little Rome of Asia, with the most prominent structure in the town being the 1571 St. Paul's, the church at the promontory. The tip of the promontory was where Dejima would be constructed 61 years later. Dejima is a man-made island which was used for 2 years by the Portuguese and then by the Dutch traders for nearly 2 centuries. When the Dutch moved to Dejima, the church was replaced by a branch office of the magistrate sent by the shogunate, which carefully monitored trade with the Dutch and the Chinese. You can see the Chinese storehouses on the top left there. Dejima today is an important and carefully reconstructed archaeological site. The fan shape of the original island can be seen in this aerial photograph, although landfill and city buildings now surround its outer seawall. The original single bridge to the island was recently reconstructed. Following Oda Nobunaga's assassination, his great general Toyotomi Hideyoshi seized power. Hideyoshi was initially lenient towards the Jesuits. He told them that if the Jesuits provided large-scale ships for Hideyoshi's planned invasion of Korea and Ming China in 1592 to 1598, he would allow churches in the captured lands. Hideyoshi became increasingly wary of the threat to political unity that Christianity represented, and in 1587, to everyone's surprise, he ordered the expulsion of Catholic priests from Japan. But little came of these expulsion orders. In the following year, he did abrogate Jesuit control of Nagasaki, but accepted missionaries to protect lucrative foreign trade. However, in 1596, the Spanish galleon San Felipe was shipwrecked at Urado Bay along the Shikoku coastline. It was a trade galleon which used the trade winds to sail between the Philippines and Mexico. Shipwrecked San Felipe crew members boasted that missionaries had been sent to Japan to prepare the local population for colonization by the armies of Spain. This led to a severe crackdown on Christian priests. 6 Franciscans, 15 tertiaries, and 3 believers from Nagasaki, including Saint John of Goto, were rounded up in Kyoto, marched to Nagasaki, and martyred. A monument and church stands opposite Nagasaki Station today at the location of the crucifixions. 2 popes have since visited the site. This painting was completed in 1869. It was commissioned by Father Petterjean of the new Oura church built in Nagasaki. The church itself commemorates the martyrs. He participated in the First Vatican Council in Rome and commissioned the painting then. The painting was damaged in the atomic blast of 1945, but it's been restored and hangs in the Oura church today. The martyrs were all canonized in 1962. Hideyoshi died a year after the 26 were martyred in Nagasaki, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, the third and final great unifier of Japan, came to power in 1603 and moved his seat of government to Edo, today's Tokyo. Ieyasu also initially tolerated the Christians, as he was keen to encourage peaceful commercial exchange with Southeast Asia. He issued permits to Red Seal ships, which were in fact armed trading ships. Most continued to use Nagasaki as their base of trade. Nagasaki's status quo was interrupted when Arima Harunobu, one of those 3 great Christian daimyo, attacked a Portuguese carrack off the coast of Nagasaki. This was in retaliation for an attack on Arima's own ship near Macau by the Portuguese. Initially, Ieyasu sent an official from his own court to congratulate Harunobu for his brave stand against the Portuguese, but discovered that his court official and Harunobu were Christians, so both were executed. In 1612, Ieyasu banned foreign religion in Nagasaki and extended this to all of Japan in 1614. This began full-fledged persecutions against Christians. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the defeat of the Spanish Armada by the English in 1588 turned English and Dutch commercial enterprise interest towards East Asia. By the 1570s, Francis Drake had completed the second ever circumnavigation of the globe, and by the end of the 16th century, English pilots were keenly sought after. And it's in this context that the young English pilot, William Adams, arrived in Japan on De Liefde, a Dutch East India Company trading vessel. It foundered off the coast of Oita Prefecture in Kyushu. Adams was brought before Ieyasu, who immediately accepted him as an advisor on shipbuilding, navigation, and armory. Advised by William Adams, Ieyasu issued a free trade agreement to England and Holland, countries that, as Adams explained, promoted trade and eschewed religious activity. Ieyasu's grandson, the third Tokugawa shogun, Iemitsu, would order the construction of Dejima in 1634. He forced all Portuguese to live on the island, which was not considered Japanese mother soil. 2 years later, he banned Portuguese from Japan and forced the Dutch, who were trading out of Hirado, to move to and trade from the tiny man-made island of Dejima. The Dutch would use this small commercial and residential base for the next 220 years and would be the only Europeans allowed contact with Japan during its long period of national isolation. I should qualify this statement by saying that after 1774, the year of publication of a medical text called the Kaitai Shinsho, the Japanese actively sought knowledge from overseas through text form. Many books were translated, as long as they didn't refer to Christianity. By 1637, over 20 years after the strict ban on Christianity, Japanese leaders reasonably assumed that Christianity no longer existed in Japan. They were mistaken. The people of Shimabara domain, who had been allowed to practice their faith under Arima Harunobu, who'd sunk the Portuguese Karak, were experiencing severe mistreatment under the new cruel daimyo Matsukura, who had replaced Harunobu after he was assassinated. They revolted against the tyrannical Matsukura and for 4 months held their ground against shogunate forces at Hara Castle. Now, the revolt was about taxation, but the fact is they were all Christians. Even the Dutch lent a hand to bomb the Christians in the castle. The rebellion was led by a young, charismatic Christian boy, Amakusa Shiro. 37,000 Christians would eventually be slaughtered at the castle site. This is Amakusa Shiro's battlefield flag, and a museum dedicated to him stands on the Amakusa Islands, and the castle site is located along the beautiful Ariake Sea. This is a folding screen depicting the attack on the Hara Castle. You can see shogunate forces scaling the castle walls, and I put the Derib Dutch ship in there. When they fired on the castle, Amakusa Shiro questioned the shogunate forces. He asked, "Are there no longer courageous soldiers in the realm to do combat with us? And weren't they ashamed to have called in the assistance of foreigners against our small contingent?" Indeed. Shiro was beheaded and his severed head put on display outside Dejima. The Shimabara rebellion was the catalyst for the Tokugawa shogunate to sever relations with Portugal and to compel the Dutch to move their trading post from Hirado to Dejima. Nagasaki rebounded again as even more merchants and laborers arrived from all over Japan. 30,000 residents engaged in trade and shipping. Nagasaki Township functioned like a huge commercial enterprise. By the late 1620s, all citizens of Nagasaki had to undergo fumiye, or annual trampling of an image of Christ or Maria, stating that they were not Christians. They had to sign documents as well, promising the Christian and Buddhist gods that they weren't Christian, that they only worshipped Buddhist and Shinto gods. This turning out of every home in Nagasaki eventually turned into the Nagasaki Kunchi Festival, which has continued long after the last Christian was hunted out. It was a way for locals to see the cloistered Maruyama courtesans, and remains a huge celebration in Nagasaki today. So the festival, it's a mix of Dutch, you can see VOC, the Dutch East India Trading Company vessel there, and Chinese, there's a Chinese dragon, and Japanese culture, including the cloistered Maruyama courtesans that ordinary citizens could never glimpse. Despite these persecutions, hidden Christians persisted with their faith, worshipping tiny crucifixes of Christ and images of the Maria Kannon. This is one of the items confiscated during the Edo shogunate's third crackdown of Christianity in the village of Urakami in 1856. Hidden Christians had repurposed imported statues of Kannon, the goddess of mercy, into the Virgin Mary and worshipped her in secret. A Maria Kannon statue is often indistinguishable from an actual statue of Kannon. We can infer that this statue was indeed worshipped as a Maria Kannon based on how it was found among the articles confiscated from Christians. This rosary was confiscated during the Edo shogunate's fourth crackdown of Christianity in Urakami village in 1867. It was one of the rosaries and crosses that Father Petitjean, the first father from the Oura church, had given to hidden Christians who had revealed themselves to him. The main concentrations of hidden Christians were in remote areas, Hirado and Ikitsuki Islands, Nagasaki, Sotome, and Amakusa. And this leads us to the Goto Islands. In 1797, when the Goto domain submitted a request to the Omura domain for settlers to cultivate undeveloped land, some 3,000 people from the Sotome area volunteered, or in fact were forced to move to the islands. This was the way the Omuras got rid of their Christians. Life was not much easier there, but at least the people gained some measure of religious freedom. Many of them went to the little Hisaka Island or Naru, or up to the tiny island of Kashiragashima, which we'll visit shortly. After time, their grasp of the tenets of Christianity became increasingly tenuous, and Buddhist and Shintoist elements seeped into their religious beliefs. When the Vatican was able to access these groups, they were appalled by these masses and said, this is not how you conduct mass. And the hidden Christians, some of them said, no, this is how we conduct our mass. And they are known as the Kakure Christians of the Goto Islands. Japan opened to the West in 1858, following the completion of a treaty which gave trade and residency rights to the US, UK, Russia, France, and the Netherlands. 3 treaty ports were established at Hakodate in Hokkaido, Yokohama, and Nagasaki. Nagasaki began a huge reclamation project at Oura, and by 1860, international merchants were pouring into Nagasaki, building a Western-style landscape along the Oura Bund. The buildings along the Bund were an amalgamation of Japanese and European styles. Rough sketches of buildings by European owners would be interpreted freely by Japanese carpenters. Some of the buildings survive, including this HSBC building, completed in 1904 by architect Shimoda Kikutaro. Also, the elegant 1863 home of Thomas Blake Glover, a Scottish arms trader. This stands in the Glover Gardens with fine views over Nagasaki. A wonderful visit today. The Ora Catholic Church stands at the base of this hill, which Glover House stands. It was built by the Paris Foreign Missions Society. The French took responsibility for the Nagasaki area. Father Bernard Petitjean arrived in October 1863, and the church he built was consecrated in February 1865. But the Japanese government's understanding was that the church was for the exclusive use of foreigners in Nagasaki. It was constructed by the master carpenter Koyama Hidenoshin, who also built the Glover and Alt homes. The Gothic-style church had large lettering in Japanese on the front stating Tenshudo, or church, an illegal but obvious invitation to locals. Today, white stucco brick encases the original wooden structure. This protected the structure in the atomic blast. This extension work was completed in 1879. In 1953, it was designated a national treasure, the first Western-style building to receive this honor. The Holy See bestowed on it the status of minor basilica in 2016. The interior of the building remains largely unchanged since it was first constructed. The high vault ceilings, typical of Gothic places of worship, were constructed using wooden reinforcements, rib vaults, commonly known as bat-shaped ceilings, rather than the stone that was used in Europe. This testifies to the skill or ingenuity of Japanese carpenters of the time. The white ceilings are made of bamboo, woven in a distinctive way and covered with clay, impossible to recreate today. In March 1865, a month after it was consecrated, Father Petitjean reported 12 to 15 men, women, and children standing in front of his church. They were from Urakami, a suburb of Nagasaki. Father Petitjean would discover that almost all Urakami villagers were Christians. Despite 250 years of isolation, the Christians of Urakami had perished. A woman, Sugimoto Yuri, baptized as Isaberina, was the first to reveal her faith to Father Petitjean. She told him, "The heart of all those present is the same as yours." The Nagasaki magistrate initially turned a blind eye to these hidden Christians, even as 4 secret chapels were erected in Urakami. Following an illegal Christian funeral, Japanese had to be buried by Buddhists, magistrate spies burst into the Santa Maria Sanctuary, like the one on the left, one of the 4 secret Urakami chapels. They burst in on the 15th of July, 1867. 68 people were arrested. They faced brutal torture, despite the French ambassador pleading with the shogun. All Urakami Christians were exiled to other parts of Japan. The persecutions lasted until 1873. In the end, 3,600 Urakami Christians were banished, and 650 of them died in the final wave of persecutions. On the Goto Islands also, hidden Christians revealed themselves because they heard what had happened at Oura Church, and they were also persecuted. They were held in makeshift prisons, and many died. And the churches we see on Goto are venerations of these martyrs on the sites of the prisons. In Urakami, the villagers returned in 1873 after the Meiji government allowed religious freedom, and they put together donations. This is incredible. They later purchased the land of the village headman where all the torturing had occurred. And in 1895, construction began on the Urakami Cathedral. It was the largest Christian structure in all of Asia until 11 on the 9th of August, 1945, when the atomic bomb was dropped on top of it. The hypocenter of the atomic bomb was the cathedral. 2 priests and 18 faithful perished in the ruins of the building. Of the 12,000 Catholics living in Urakami at the time, 8,500 perished in the atomic bombing. The remains of the entrance to the cathedral have been preserved carefully in the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum. The Goto Islands are about 100 and, oh, sorry, this is the new cathedral, which is built next to the Peace Park. The Goto Islands are about 120 kilometers off the coast of Nagasaki. Goto means 5 islands. The 5 are Fukue, Hisaka, Naru, Wakamatsu, and Nakadori. And we're going to visit Fukue and Nakadori first. The islands were a sanctuary for the 3,000 Christians from Sotome when forcibly moved here in 1797. Today, the islands are linked by ferries and bridges, but are still quite difficult to access. Christian churches dot the complex coastline. Very beautiful church. We're going to visit Dozaki Church. The islands are famous for their camellia trees. Camellias are farmed for both fruit and oil. The camellia pattern is often found decorating the interior of churches and is associated with the Virgin Mary. The northerly large island is Nakadori. Our call is to the UNESCO Heritage listed Kashiragashima Church. Kashira Island was uninhabited until the end of the Edo period. There is an airport there, but it's disused. They might use it occasionally for emergency helicopter flights, that's all. The church had its beginnings in 1867 when a Japanese believer named Domingo Matsujiro Mori escaped persecution in Kurosaki in the Omura domain and moved here after receiving religious instruction from Father Pettijan in Nagasaki. He initially established a temporary church as a youth missionary school. The rare stone church construction began in 1910 and was completed in 1919. And it was consecrated in May of that year. It was designed and constructed by Tetsukawa Yosuke, the father of Japanese church architecture. It's known as the Flower Church for obvious reasons, and the flowers on the right there are, of course, camellias. The graveyard stands at the front of the bay overlooking front of the church or village overlooking the bay. The gravestones are just Buddhist grave stupas, 5-level stupas, but with a crucifix on top. The village consisted of 10 households, very poor, and today there are just 2 households. But the church cost the equivalent of 7 households at the time. And so I find the dedication of these 10 households, their beliefs are admirable. Tetsukawa Yosuke built many of the churches on the Goto Islands. The one here at Kashira is his UNESCO Heritage listed church. He was a Buddhist, so he built 3 temples. He also built reinforced concrete structures well before 1923, when that became popular after the great earthquake in Tokyo. He was born on Nakadori Island. My favorite church on the island is Nakanoura Church. It has this lovely reflection. We next visit the southernmost island of Fukue. Fukue Island has an airport and Dozaki Church in the north, another UNESCO Heritage listed church. Also, you can see Onidake there. Great views are afforded over the port From here, it's an astronomy observatory. I like going out to the Osezaki cliffs, which are about 100 meters high. They've been eroded by wind and waves. The Osezaki lighthouse is at the tip of a promontory, and it stands 80 meters above the sea. It was completed in December 1879. Its powerful light is 2 million candela and is seen 50 kilometers offshore. In 1898, the former Japanese Navy set up an observation post equipped with wireless telegraph, and in 1905, the post received the telegram warning, "Enemy ships sighted," when the Russian Baltic Fleet was first seen approaching Japan during the Russo-Japanese War. Kashiwa was the last port of call for Kentoshi envoys from Japan to the Tang dynasty court in Xi'an in the 7th and 8th century. The route became more direct through the centuries as Japanese sailors became more knowledgeable about crossing the East China Sea. The Kentoshi ships usually departed in a flotilla of 4, and in the latter part of the Nara period, they would moor here. You can still see moorings, stones in Shiraishi Bay. This was their last few moments on mother soil, Japanese soil. This is Dozaki Church. Soon after the ban on Christianity was lifted by the Meiji government, 2 French missionaries, Father Franieu and Marmande, were sent to Goto in order to take part in the revival of the local Christian community. Father Marmande established the first wooden church in Goto in 1879. But Dozaki Church was rebuilt in red bricks in 1908 under the guidance of Father Pellieu. He succeeded Marmande and Franieu. Some of the materials were brought all the way from Italy. The inside of the church is made of wood with typical stained glass and ribbed vault ceilings. But today it's a museum. You see the red candle or red light has been extinguished, so it's been deconsecrated. So the museum has various objects and documents showing us the history of the Christians persecuted in the Goto Islands. Maria Kannon statues, you know, and the small devotional objects such as crucifixes, and less obvious symbols such as crosses on Japanese sword protectors, crucifix designs on ceramics, and the conch shells, usually used by mountain ascetics. These were used as the call to mass, and famously the Doro woodcut prints are displayed in the church. Now, the name derived from the person who commissioned them, a missionary, Marco de Rotz. So the Japanese shorten it to Doro. And he came to Nagasaki and devoted his life to the local Christians. He ordered the prints in 1877, but they were only rediscovered in 1973 in a local follower's home in the village of Toki. The prints depict the last of a good man, the last of an evil man, and on the right-hand side, the last judgment. You can see the man is a samurai, and he has a top knot. The local area around the church is just a delight to stroll around. There are wonderful locals selling ice creams and good coffee. In the interior of the island is Kusuhara Church. I just show this because it is the location of one of those prisons. It was built in 1912 alongside Dozaki. It is one of the oldest on Fukue. And the prison venerates the persecuted Christians who died at the prison, which is next door. The prison was a farmhouse. 35 hidden Christians were imprisoned here. All of them died in the torturous conditions to which they were subjected. The frame of the house is original. Yes, all of these people died in these torturous conditions. And very close nearby is the Mizunoura church and prison. I put this in because this is the rebuilt version by Tetsukawa Yosuke in 1938, and beautiful mix of architectural grandeur, the Romanesque, Gothic, and Japanese styles combined. But it's interesting because the church's structure is the same as the Oura Cathedral in Nagasaki, if you recall. The first church was damaged by the winds. It's obvious from this very beautiful location. So today, about 2 million or 1.5% of Japanese identify as being Christian. The Christian community is split roughly between Catholics, many of whom trace their Catholicism back to the earliest days of hidden Christianity. And the other half are Protestant, mainly converting after World War II under evangelism from the United States. Some of the most beautiful modern churches can be found in Japan. The father of Japanese modern architecture, Tange Kenzo, built the important main cathedral in Tokyo in 1964. Tange was a Christian. And the famous contemporary architect, Ando Tadao, who's famous for introducing light into his concrete structures, he built this impressive Church of Light in Osaka in 1998. Unfortunately, the congregation has aged and they don't allow visitors into the church anymore. On the Protestant side, the Tokyo Union Church stands along Omotesando, which is the Champs-Élysées of Tokyo, the fashion center of Tokyo. It's a very beautiful church built in 1980 by Edward Suzuki. Thank you. Thank you. Just a reminder again, my document that you can download is at bit.ly/Goto Christians. Hope to see you again at another talk. Thank you.